Our guest today is Anthony Stansfeld, former Thames Valley Police and Crime Commissioner, who has locked horns with the City of London and bankers in the past. I thought it'd be good to invite Anthony because there are lots of issues around, not just about the post office, but there are issues about so many other, what people would say, nefarious, fraudulent practices, which so easily get buried, but they need to be dealt with. So hopefully, we are hoping to organise further events and invite people affected by Grenfell and other kind of banking frauds, blood infection, many, many other things. And hopefully we would return to those events, and I'm also hoping that we will be able to find a bigger room. So without saying anything else, I ask Anthony to speak. He will speak for about 20-25 minutes, then there will be opportunities for questions and discussion. Thank you, Anthony.
Right, well, we haven't got loudspeakers, and I hope I don't lose my voice, so I hope you can all hear me. And I'll go through this as succinctly as I can. The post office scandal only became apparent to the public when a TV programme was made about it. It's been known about for years, yet nothing was done. Some postmasters were still being dragged in front of courts and imprisoned. Lives were ruined, and none of them manifestly guilty have been held to account, and very few of the victims paid back the money that the post office has stolen from them. No compensation has been paid. The major banking frauds have many parallels. The main difference is the scale of the money stolen. The post office frauds amounted to probably less than 700 million, and I don't know what the figure is. The banking frauds run into billions and ruined far more people and destroyed a huge number of companies. Both the banking frauds and the post office frauds have been well known about for years, and both have been covered up by the very institutions that should have exposed them. The only bank fraud held to account was the Lloyds HBOS Reading frauds, which were themselves in financial terms larger than the entire post office frauds, though the prosecution was only done on 245 million. The actual frauds were somewhere between 800 million and $1 billion. What was going on at other bank branches, notably out of London, Bristol, Leeds and Edinburgh, were on a far larger scale and have never been properly investigated. I was the Police and Crime Commissioner at the time of the Thames Valley Police prosecutions of the Lloyds HBOS Reading case, but I can take absolutely no credit for that myself. I was fortunate to have an excellent Chief Constable in Sarah Thornton who took on the case. It had been turned down by 2 other police forces and the Serious Fraud Office. If Thames Valley hadn't taken it on, nothing would have been done. The Financial Conduct Authority declined to take any interest. The 6 most directly involved bankers received sentences that amounted to 49 years in the end. But only about a quarter of the fraud was actually prosecuted, and in my view, a lot of the more serious people who knew perfectly well what was going on got away with it. The case cost Thames Valley Police £7 million to bring. The Financial Conduct Authority eventually fined Lloyds an initial 65 million, reduced to 45 million to thank them for their cooperation. Well, they certainly did not cooperate with the Thames Valley Police investigation. Throughout the 3-year investigation, Lloyds steadfastly refused to admit a major fraud had taken place. It was not until the guilty verdicts were returned that Lloyds admitted to frauds they had known about throughout the investigation and trial. I had no doubt about that. The £7 million fine on Lloyds went direct to the Treasury. Absolutely none came back to Thames Valley Police to pay for the investigation, though actually the Home Office came up with, I think, about 1.9 million in the end. I wrote to the then Chancellor, Philip Hammond, and asked the Thames Valley Police to be repaid. I got an unsigned curt letter saying no. The one lesson that came out of the case that it was simply not worth a police force taking on major frauds involving banks. it cannot afford to take on the bank's legal team, such as Herbert Smith Freehills. I had a meeting with the chairman of Lloyd's, and that was Lord Blackwell, his executive director, Juan Columbus, and the Lloyd's Group lawyer and chief risk officer, Kate Cheetham, in March 2017. The notes of the meeting were taken by my deputy, Matthew Barber, who is the current PCC at Thames Valley. They're worth going through, and I do have them here, and I think it's worth me just talking through them, because at this meeting I was consistently lied to. The meeting held in the chairman's office, that's Lord Blackwell's office, on 8th floor of 25 Gresham Street. Those in attendance were Lord Blackwell, Group Chairman, Juan Columbus, Executive Director, Chief Risk Officer, and Kate Cheetham. We were well received, but it was made immediately clear that the sole topic of the meeting was about the claims of the victims of the HBOS fraud. It was also intimated that any inquiry went beyond that, just the victims, it would take much longer for the victims to be compensated. A clear distinction was made about wrongdoing and criminality. Well, that's a cover-up if ever there was one in the banking world. There was an acceptance of numerous cases of bad practice by HBOS prior to the Lloyd's banking group takeover. Well, Lloyd's had actually owned it for many years before this story is, but a continued refusal to accept knowledge of criminality. Well, Lloyd's denied criminality throughout the court case, if you remember. Lord Blackwell stated on several occasions he had no reason to defend anything that went on in HBOS and would not only cooperate but encourage further inquiries into criminality. Well, I didn't notice any of that happening afterwards. There was a clear case, a desire to compensate victims as soon as possible. Lord Blackwell stated this was his sole concern, and Juan Columbus stated that he expected independent reviews being undertaken to be concluded in a few months. 7 years later, that inquiry is still going on. 7 years later. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Lloyd's Banking Group, along with the FCA, have appointed independent review of the 50 or so known cases resulting from the Reading incident. The process of evaluation, the compensation was in two parts: the underlying value of the business at the point they became insolvent in the Reading incident, and the compensation due for distress and loss. Well, there was precious little compensation. The bare minimum was paid out, I can tell you. Lord Blackwell argued that many of the companies were effectively bankrupt at the point of the fraud commencing, and therefore little or no residual value was lost to the shareholders through the fraud. Anthony Stansfeld argued that in many cases they became bankrupt through the actions of HBOS. It was also pointed out that much money was lost because of the bank's actions to recover money beyond bankrupting the companies, but in many cases seeking to recover against the assets of the business owners. Well, it's interesting that I think they call it the Bank Support Unit, the BSU, out of Bristol, which was meant to support companies and was not a cost centre meant to make money. It was making a bloody fortune out of the assets of companies it was taking down. I will skip a lot of it, but there was an absolute refusal to admit that the bank was aware of the frauds before the court case was completed. Well, I simply don't believe that. It was well known about within the bank. Anthony Stansfeld pointed out there seemed to be irrefutable evidence that many senior executives of both LBG and HBOS were well aware of the fraud since at least 2008. That was challenged. Well, they certainly knew about it. Kate Cheetham claimed that Lloyd's Banking Group had always acknowledged that they had lost money but did not wish to present themselves as a victim of fraud. Well, really. Lord Blackwell was specifically asked if he'd read the Sally Marston report, which was commissioned internally by Lloyd's Banking Group. He denied being aware of the report. I find that difficult to believe, and certainly had not read it. Both Kate Cheetham and Juan Columbus acknowledged the existence of the report, but denied having read it. Well, for the Chief Risk Officer at Lloyd's not to have read it, I would find actually unbelievable. Kate Cheetham originally suggested that Sally Marston was an HBOS employee. Anthony Stansfeld corrected this and pointed out that she was an LBG employee when she read the report. And I won't go on into it, but it was the most extraordinary meeting. and they had every opportunity to to be honest at it. And I simply don't believe that they were. Now, if a gang raids a bank through the front door and 50,000, 500,000, 50,000 is stolen, the police will be all over it. There'll be blue lights everywhere, great excitement. If somebody steals 50 million through the back door of a bank, precisely nothing is done about it. It is covered up.
Yeah, yeah.
And what the police need to realise is not only is it organised, but it is a crime. It is serious organised crime that they're avoiding looking at. No massive bank frauds are now being investigated. The one large fraud that has been taken to a criminal court had to be done privately. The judge castigated both the police and the CPS for not taking on the case. The sum involved was, I think, around 10 million. The man prosecuted was jailed for 9 years. His name comes up in a mass of other cases where huge sums of money have been stolen, far larger than 9 million, in sums into the billions. This name comes up repeatedly. This particular individual had power of attorney over these large estates and companies. The frauds appear to be done in direct collusion with the banks involved and their legal teams. Recently, this individual was made bankrupt while he was in jail. It begs the question where and how many tens of millions that he probably personally made were squirreled away. The money has clearly been laundered. I doubt the police have even got around to interviewing him in prison about these many far larger frauds that he was involved in. Certainly none of the victims of these frauds have been interviewed by the police. For most of us, in any large transaction, the bank requires to know where the money came from. They'll be all over you wanting to know where the money came from. Banks themselves can move vast sums of money between sort codes without anybody being the wiser, and the money disappears into the Caymans, the Virgin Islands, or Jersey. As far as I know, there is no proper control over this. They're meant to self-control. They clearly don't. A detailed report, called the Lord Turnbull report, was written by a senior bank employee, Sally Masterton, on what had been going on in Lloyds Bank. It was commissioned by Sue Harris, the Lloyds Group Director of Audit. The report lays out in detail the criminal activities within Lloyds. It names the name of several senior directors involved. Sally Masterton was then sacked from her job without proper compensation, and the bank then claimed the report was unauthorised. Well, it was certainly authorised. It was a lie. It took myself and Lord Hollick to insist on a meeting with the Lloyds Bank chairman, Lord Blackwell, before Sally Masterton was eventually compensated properly. Her life had been ruined for 3 years. However, to get compensation, she had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. The report was not acted on in spite of ample evidence that was borne out by the ex-boss prosecutions. Every person who was eventually paid back money, the money that was taken from them in the Lloyds H-Boss Reading case, had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Why should the bank refuse to pay back money to the bank stole unless the victims sign an NDA? And this business of NDAs is absolutely absurd. If you want your money back that we've stolen from you, you've got to sign an NDA. There's something very wrong there. I think this whole business of NDAs needs looking at.
Yeah.
What was going on in Lloyds was also going on in RBS, now called the NatWest Bank, and also in Santander. Surprisingly, and I think it is surprisingly, it does not appear to have been going on in either Barclays or HSBC, though there may have been specific cases where dodgy people within their banks have tried it on, but it was not being done systemically from either of them, as far as I can see, looking at most of the victims. The way the bank frauds operate against both individuals and companies varies, but there are common threads. In most cases, there are clearly forged documents. These are often on bank guarantees. Loans are altered without any authorization. Bank accounts are opened in company or individual names. lent large sums of money at very high interest rates the individual company has absolutely no knowledge of. And I have one actually sitting right in front of me here, which is an interesting one. This is a hedging fund thing that was done on the back of totally forged documents. The person who was supposed to have signed the documents was abroad at the time. £14 million went on this document. £14 million on a totally false document. It took her years, I think it was 9 years, to get hold of this document that the bank had claimed signed it over. And it was quite clear she wasn't in the country when she signed it. And this has gone on a different scale from what we're talking about, the tens of millions, down to the odd, few 100,000. But it was being done systemically, the forging of documents. Lloyds have a division called the Bank Support Unit, the BSU, and NatWest RBS, a similar division, it's called their Global Recoveries Group. Companies with tangible assets are put into these divisions, allegedly to support or help them recover. Companies simply do not emerge from them. Neither is meant to be a profit centre. Both have made vast sums of money. How can they be making money out of support units of supposedly bankrupt companies? There is something very odd there indeed. The aim is to bankrupt the company or individual in order to seize their assets, which are worth vastly more than any possible loan. Legal companies run up huge bills at extortionate interest rates. I've seen several cases where purported loans, sometimes even below £20,000, have been used to seize people's houses and companies and assets worth vastly more than any possible loan. This has gone on, I believe, on an industrial scale, and nothing is done about it. When a company is taken down, the assets are usually far greater than the debt. I mean, the bank's not frankly worried about taking down a company that's in debt that hasn't got any assets. The ones they love are taking down companies that have massive assets on a very small loan and using, again, very forged documentation. As in the post office, there are financial incentives for managers to take down companies or individuals if it makes money. Fraud is almost encouraged within the banks if it makes money, and the managers are incentivized to do so. There is something very wrong with that. The cases often end up in civil courts. These courts seem to be in the pocket of the banks, and I find this extraordinary in this country. In spite of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, the judgment always goes in favour of the bank. Certain legal companies' names come up repeatedly in these cases. They're taken on by these particular companies. And there is evidence that certain judges, usually part-time judges in these civil courts, go out of their way to take on these particular cases. And there really does need to be an investigation onto why these particular judges take on these cases. And quite honestly, you haven't the hope if you end up in front of one of them, from all I've seen. One of the problems with major frauds is that no agency will take them on. The police do not have the expertise, time or money to take on a large fraud. Thames Valley Police had to take on over 50 outside accountants in the Lloyd H. Boss Reading case. I do not believe any major fraud has been taken on by the police since the Lloyd H. Boss case. And that was started in about 2014, 2015. The regulatory authorities cover up rather than investigate when it comes to banks. The FCA will not take cases on. I had meetings and extensive correspondence with Andrew Bailey when I was PCC of Thames Valley and he ran the FCA. All cases had to go to him and nothing ever emerged. A great number of cases in which false signatures were used were sent to the National Crime Agency. None were investigated. The NCA briefly looked into about 9 cases, and I think they've chosen carefully. It said there was no clear fraud or forged documents. In none of these cases was the victim even interviewed. They were clear frauds. There was a close relationship between the head of the FCA and the head of the NCA. Both had worked closely together in the Bank of England. Every case involving a major bank was simply covered up. Lloyds Bank financially sponsor the National Crime Agency. Hardly surprising the NCA avoids investigating banks. Kevin Hollinrake, the minister now dealing with this area, wrote to the managing director of Lloyds, Auto Authority, in September 2019, asking about the forged documentation being used by Lloyds for bankrupt customers. He asked that in all cases the bank desists from trying to take money from them. As far as I'm aware, the letter was ignored and the bank continued to pillage customers. I actually have his letter to them, that's a good letter. The SFO, the Serious Fraud Office, is too small to take on banking fraud and usually passes cases to other agencies. The Bank of England will not get involved. It protects the banks, regardless. Its current governor, Andrew Bailey, of course, was in charge of the FCA and must have known perfectly well what was going on. The City of London Police no longer seems to investigate fraud in the city. That, I thought, was the main reason for its very existence in the first place. Practically all cases are sent to action fraud. The City of London Police are financially sponsored by Lloyds. Action Fraud is a call centre in Glasgow. It does not investigate fraud. The Times did a good expose of the sheer uselessness of Action Fraud. Action Fraud is financially sponsored by Lloyds. As far as I'm aware, nothing has been done to address the issues the Times highlighted. A few cases are sent down to the police forces to look into. They're quietly shelved, as far as I can see. It would be interesting to know how many cases have been sent to Action Fraud and how many actually resulted in an investigation. Vanishingly few, I believe. Another problem, of course, with the regulatory authorities are things like the Solicitors Regulatory Authority. I thought it was there to protect the customers. It seems to have forgotten that completely and is out there to protect its members, which was not the intention of it at all.
Even its big members.
Several of the most prominent players in all of this that I have seen now sit in the House of Lords. Some of them should be sitting in Wormwood Scrubs. There seems to be a serious problem with both the Insolvency Service and Land Registry. I'll not go through this in this presentation. There appears to be serious manipulation of both in favour of certain banks. The regulatory authorities, however strong the evidence of financial corruption within banking, pass the parcel between each other, and nothing is done. Until far clearer lines of responsibility are laid down, they will continue doing this. I sent a clear brief to the Prime Minister, Theresa May, in 2017, and I knew her well. She was an MP in my area, and she'd been Home Secretary. And she asked the PCCs, if anything really serious came up, to take it up directly with her rather than going public immediately. She passed the quite comprehensive brief I sent her straight to the Cabinet Secretary. And I'll just read out the correspondence I had with him. And it was actually quite extraordinary.
Read it out in Parliament as well. I read it.
Well, and the letter said my brief was passed to the Cabinet Secretary by Theresa May. Let's find the right letter. Dear Mr. Stansfeld, thank you for a letter of 30th May 2017 to the Prime Minister about Lloyds Banking Group and the banking sector more widely. She asked me to reply on her behalf. I'm very concerned to read the extremely serious allegations set out in your letter, and I'm grateful to you for bringing them to the attention of the Prime Minister. I would strongly encourage you to pursue them formally through the proper channels by contacting Andrew Bailey at the Finance Secretary. He can be reached, blah, blah, blah. Given the extremely serious allegations of your allegations, I'll keep a close eye on this matter and be happy to meet with you if you find it useful. I then wrote back to him a polite letter, and I said thank you for replying on the Prime Minister's behalf to my letter on banking frauds. My problem about dealing directly with the financial authority is that the current chairman was senior partner of KPMG, which audited the HBOS accounts and overlooked a massive fraud. That was the Lloyds fraud, where several hundred million went walkabout. I would like a meeting with you, if possible, to show you some of the compelling evidence and discuss what should be done about it. I showed this to Mr. Gavin Barlow in your office on the 12th of June last, and he was absolutely horrified by it, I can tell you. I'm grateful if you could contact my office anyway. I then got back this letter. Dear Mr. Stansfeld, this from the Cabinet Secretary. Thank you for your recent letters. On the recommendations given to me in briefings on this case, I have decided that I'll be unable to meet you to discuss these matters. I would recommend you make contact with the Serious Fraud Office. Well, the Serious Fraud Office had turned down the H-Boss Reading case, if you remember. Absolutely no point in getting onto them at all. Anyway, he was sent comprehensive briefs and absolutely nothing happened whatsoever. So that was a fairly fruitless exercise on my behalf. In both the Lloyd's H-Boss and in the Post Office inquiries, Post Office frauds, inquiries were set up. Inquiries now seem to have become a way to cover up major establishment wrongdoing. Unless an inquiry has a fixed date by which it must report, it will go on almost indefinitely at huge cost for the taxpayer and to the great financial advantage of the lawyers involved. Every inquiry should issue an interim report within 1 year. The victims are largely ignored. Even when the victims are eventually compensated or paid back the money stolen from them, the lawyers involved are paid far more than the victims usually. And it's usually taken from the compensation meant for the victims. That cannot be right. The Dame Linda Dobbs inquiry into what went on in Lloyd's H-Boss has now entered its 7th year. That is the inquiry that the boss of Lloyd's Bank told me would take a few months. It has published nothing. I asked Dame Linda for an interim report. My request was refused. Many of the victims who might have greatly assisted have since died or lived in abject poverty, and most of those responsible, in many cases criminally involved, have long since retired on their large pensions from the proceeds of their crimes. The Dame Linda Dobbs inquiry is paid for by Lloyd's Bank. So much for independence. It is understandable that police forces do not have the resources to deal with banking fraud. However, some of them seem to be in the pockets of the banks and go out of their way to cover up on behalf of the banks. Avon and Somerset police are named by a considerable number of victims as being well aware of what has been going on, but cover it up, and Bristol is one of the major centres. From all I've seen, I would agree with that. I won't go into other police forces, but some of them do seem to have an over-familiar relationship with the banks. Too many smart dinner parties and smart occasions. I won't go into that. Less than 2% of police budgets goes towards looking into fraud, yet it accounts for probably well over 100 times, maybe 1,000 times more than the amount lost to household burglary and other scams. It's not actually as though the police were any good at finding household burglary. Some police forces it's low as about 3 or 4% or something. What the hell are the police up to? You wonder sometimes. Fraud is a very low priority, and that attitude must be changed. It is extraordinary that Lloyd's Bank financially sponsors the National Crime Agency, the City of London Police, and Action Fraud. I'm sure it entertains the managers of those organisations very well, but it hardly gives them an incentive to investigate banking frauds claimed to have coming out of Lloyd's itself. I've been describing a litany of corruption within the establishment of the banking world. I've somewhat concentrated on Lloyd's, but NatWest, RBS are every bit as involved. There seems little push to sort it out, rather the opposite. What should be done about it? I'm somewhat cynical about another inquiry that will drag on for years. What is needed is a proper set of criminal investigations and prosecutions. I believe the Met Police, and an awful lot of this does emanate from London, should be totally reorganised. It's clearly, in my view, unfit for purpose. It needs breaking down into about 5 manageable-sized police forces that deal with local crime and neighbourhood policing. There should be a central independent division that deals with serious organised crime and corruption, and a separate independent division that deals with major fraud. City of London Police should cease to exist and its local duties be put into another police force. The London Fraud Division should also be given responsibility and the finance, and that's the critical thing, for looking nationally into major banking and allied fraud in all UK police areas. Clear guidelines should be given to the regulatory authorities, notably the SFO, NCA and FCA, so that their responsibilities do not lag and the practice of passing the parcel between them each other can be stopped. I think my time has run out and I'll end there, but a great deal needs to be done to sort out the problems that are seriously damaging to the UK's reputation internationally. They're damaging the bedrock of our economy, our small and medium-sized companies, and ruining countless lives. Thank you very much. I will try and answer questions. I may have to defer to other people. I've got William May, who knows probably much more about it than I do here. And when you ask a question, could you just say who you are, so we do know? Sorry. Well,
Thank you very much. There's a lot of sadness and harm around for no good reason, purely because some people are intoxicated with accumulation of wealth and they don't actually care what the consequences are. That's the real problem. And as Anthony has identified, performance-related pay has been an absolute curse. And we see that coming through the post office scandal as well. Anthony referred to Dame Linda Dobbs' report, so I thought I'd table a question, a written question, but it got a blowback by saying, well, it's not really a government inquiry, so how can you ask a question about it? So I reframed the question, I tabled it yesterday, said, would the government commission an independent inquiry into HBOS frauds? And then no doubt, if they give me a reply, the Dobbs is looking at it, then that would give me a hook to get back at the government. We just don't really investigate frauds at all in this country. BCCI was the biggest banking fraud of 20th century. Bank shut down in July 1991. To this day, there has been no investigation. I fought a 5.5 years case against the Treasury and the Bank of England to get hold of one document, which is called the Sandstorm Report, and it lays bare how the UK government was complicit in funding Al-Qaeda, Saudi intelligence, smugglers, murderers, because they were all considered to be good guys for fighting the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. But there is nothing. A number of times I've confronted ministers about this. I said, why don't you, what I secured through the courts, why don't you put it on public record? I don't get answer at all other than we might consider it, and nothing is ever considered. I raised the question of HSBC, which was fined in the US $1.9 billion for money laundering. George Osborne wrote to the US regulators telling them to go easy, i.e. not shut down HSBC, and the predecessor to the FCA, the Financial Services Authority, and the Bank of England also secretly wrote to the US authorities asking them to go easy on HSBC. Absolutely no investigation. I have asked the government, why did you do this? Well, show us the documents. You don't even get a reply. And that is a kind of a sham democracy we have in this country. And all the evil in some senses which spreads out to regulatory bodies emanates from the government, which enjoys a huge majority in Parliament, and it can really do anything it wants. So that's just sort of a brief commentary. Okay, I'll take 2 or 3 questions together. I will try to spread it out. I'll start at the back.
Dave Brotherston. Blackwell lied at the 2018 AGM.
Yeah.
That is a complete breach of the Companies Act, where that then made him unsuitable, ineligible, and so prohibited from seeking election to or re-election to that of office bearer in a financial institution. his board then said nothing about it, so they were instantly prohibited. So they then emplaced Budenberg and his motley crew in. I was assaulted at Budenberg's not AGM because he's not the chairman. Who do we get to enforce the Companies Act? That seems to be the crux of the matter, that nobody seems to be actually policing who's running our banks.
Okay, thank you very much. I will please take 2 or 3 together. If you can please keep your questions short. I'll also try to keep the gender balance here. So, okay, if you just stand up and
Yes,
tell us
of
who you are.
course. Well, hello, my name's Michelle Young. I was defrauded 18 years ago through the racketeering through the family courts, and that's where a lot of these frauds start, because they find out your net worth. Now, from my investigation with working with some of the best whistleblowers in the world, I would like to know, regarding the fraudulent court documents, which I believe they are asset stripping we the people of our assets and we the people of our children, who is auditing the auditors? We need an independent audit done in this country on where all these assets, including our children who are being trafficked, are going to, not the authorities currently. Thank you.
Take one more.
I need to stand for this, so that everybody hears what I have to say. I'm a former employee of SG Warburg, the investment bank. The type of this meeting is crime in the City of London. I spent the majority of my career in the City of London. I joined SG Warburg at exactly the same time that Robin Gutenberg joined it. They say that knowledge is power. Well, our knowledge of having researched these frauds for 10 years has advanced considerably. Since Big Bang and deregulation of UK financial markets, the authorities have protected the banks at every turn. We're talking about every bank, not just some banks. We're talking about every bank based in the UK. Lord Sikka has referred to BCCI. BCCI was the start of it, arguably. Then we moved on to the Blue Arrow scandal, which involved the investment banking arm of NatWest, where the judge ruled that those found guilty should be let off at appeal because the jury wouldn't understand the case. It was clearly nonsense. We then moved on to the Dodd-White Vavasor fraud, which involved Bank of Scotland in the early 2000s. Anthony was heavily involved with HBOS. HBOS itself was a sea of criminality, and the Reading fraud was only part of that. We then had libel manipulation. Again, Anthony has mentioned Sir Jeremy Haywood. Andy Verity's book, Rigged, mentions that Sir Jeremy Haywood was one of the 3 high-level people who was actually instructing the traders and the banks to manipulate their libel rates. The lesser-known BSI scandal features, and then again, Lord Sikka has mentioned HSBC and the laundering of drug money for the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. HSBC was put on a 5-year probation, which it violated in numerous ways, as indicated by the Swiss leaks, the so-called financial files, and also in the Panama Papers. Finally, we've got the RBS GRG, heinous wrongdoing, and that of Lloyd's BSU. In the case of the Post Office, blame has been deflected onto Paula Reynolds, Ed Davey to some extent, and now Fujitsu. But what we've got with the banking frauds is considerably more serious. What I can demonstrate in a report which is near completion is that the Bank of England and HM Treasury have worked closely together with other authorities. Yes, the financial regulator and the legal regulators, the prosecutors, including the Crown Prosecution Service and the Serious Fraud Office, every branch of the police. City of London Police controls the investigation of fraud nationally. amazingly. Also, the NCA, which Anthony has mentioned, is heavily involved with the signature allegations of signature forgery, which it has vehemently avoided investigating. And also, every regional police force which tries to suggest that criminal wrongdoing by banks should be a matter for civil prosecution in the courts. The courts themselves have also been suspect. What this has triggered is extensive wrongdoing by the professions, particularly the legal professions, the solicitors who have acted for the banks, also accountants and insolvency practitioners. As mentioned at this meeting several times, Andrew Bailey has been at the epicenter of the wrongdoing and took it when he became the chief executive of the Financial Conduct Authority in 2016. He took it to a new level, and that was entirely intentional because he was appointed chief executive of the Financial Conduct Authority to maintain the cover-up. In 2016, at the same time that Andrew Bailey was appointed, this is something which maybe you don't know, Roberto Salviano, he is Italy's most celebrated anti-mafia journalist. He described Britain as the most corrupt place on earth. Now that's an extraordinary title, and not one that our country should be proud of. I think he was referring to the vast array of professionals who would assist kleptocrats and other fraudsters worldwide in laundering their proceeds of money through the City of London. Nothing has changed since 2016. The government belatedly has introduced legislation to curb this, but no one is enforcing it. The traffic lights for these fraudsters remain set on green, and I believe that's deliberate. It couldn't be otherwise, because this money laundering has been going on for more than a decade. I would estimate that possibly £1 trillion has been laundered through the City of London. I believe that this is not a political matter. It's not a matter between left and right. I believe that it's a matter for respect for the rule of law and support for criminality. The authorities have got themselves on the wrong side of the law. This is a matter between right and wrong. Thank you.
Anthony, I'd like Anthony to give a very brief report.
Yes, well, I mean, I agree with everything you say. It is simply got beyond the authorities' apparent ability to do anything about fraud on the other ones. I also think I'm going to forget the actual detailed questions of the other ones now. But I mean, it is quite clear what has been going on. It is quite clear the cover-up that is going on. And it just worries me that, is a change of government going to improve it? I mean, I rather doubt it. I think it comes a lot of people in the pocket. I'd love to see where all the MPs who don't stand and go elsewhere, how many go and work for the very people we're talking about today. And I think that is a worry. So, I mean, I can't give very specific questions, but everything William May has just said, I would totally agree with.
Just take some more, so lady there.
Andrea Willows, RBS, GRG, NetWest, as used to be. I think a lot of us here are hoping that there's some press. I'm just hoping if you could make yourselves known to us at the end. Thank you. But I can't get a biscuit for you.
Okay.
Alan Richards, I'm a victim of Lloyd's recoveries in Bristol. And we've had an excellent backdrop of what's happened today.
Yeah.
But where do we go from here? If we look at what the post office victims did as a template, so we could, keep going for the next couple of weeks with things. But surely it's worked for them. Can't we do the same?
I mean, what worked for the post office was a very good 4-session television programme. Until that came out, nobody knew it was happening. It was going on in an inquiry in London that had been going on for ages, and nobody was being properly compensated.
You need a filmmaker.
It's how it gets out and becomes public before the pressure is put to do anything.
Well, we're selecting it, Anthony. I
And
would try them.
I mean, there are committees, but you've got to understand that they have their hands full, and that is always an issue.
Lobby them, because at the end of the day, you're forgetting Lloyds Bank has a very, very weak share price. And they've got to borrow money. If they can't borrow money, make money, they won't be in business. And we start getting...
you've got to remember the Sally Master, the Lord Turnbull report was actually published by a parliamentary committee because the powers to be suppressed it. So
if we don't try, we never find out, do we?
no, absolutely.
Yeah, we're putting this
Everything needs to be tried.
We'll try again.
Okay, just ask, sorry, did you want to ask? Well, sorry, that was just that, okay. If you stand up and tell us who you are,
Yes,
please.
my name is Brian Gadala. I had the dubious misfortune of working for the National Conduct Authority for about 3.5 years.
Could you speak up?
Sorry,
People
sorry.
will hear you at the
Yes,
back. Yes.
I'm saying I had the dubious misfortune of working for the Financial Conduct Authority for about 3.5 years in the mid-teens. I always had the impression of an organisation that was simply woefully inadequate. It just lacked the skill sets and the knowledge to do the job that the public expected it to be doing. I came across Bailey. We overlapped by a few months. It seemed blindingly obvious that he only went to the FCA for one reason, and that was so that he would be in pole position when the job he really wanted next came up. And the job he really wanted, of course, is the job he now has as Governor of Macmillan. He was never a man for the FCA. He went there so that he would sit there and be in the right position outside the bank, so that when the bank job came up, he'd be number one.
But he's a puppet.
Absolutely. And he's proved, frankly, a disastrous governor of the bank ever since. I was in insurance rather than banking. And I will give you just one example of how the FCA fails utterly. I was staggered when, at one point, a second-year member of the graduate recruitment scheme was appointed as the FCA's principal regulator for one of the biggest insurance companies in the country. It was staggering. It was grotesquely insulting.
He must have been one of the big four, though. That's a joke, sorry.
It was grotesquely insulting to the insurance company concerned. And of course it meant that their number one contact in the FCA had absolutely no knowledge or understanding of anything that they did. And I'm sure that you would find exactly the same sort of nonsense going on the banking side as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
No, I would agree with you. As far as I can see, one of the ways you cover up is you make sure that the most useless people are appointed to the top job very often. But that seems to go on the whole time.
Okay, just a lady there.
This relates
Sorry,
to...
tell us who you are.
Oh, I'm Rosie Hayes, and this isn't going to be very long. This relates to the enablers, the law firms, and I can see Michelle here. In the case of my group, we've worked diligently and produced evidence sufficient to convince the Financial Ombudsman and the Legal Ombudsman that we were sold unfair, unaffordable, high-interest loans by our family lawyers. While the Financial Ombudsman has published our decisions, and Novitas loans that were selling these has consequently exploded to the tune of £90 million inside of close price. They've placed a £90 million hole inside close price. The Legal Ombudsman does not publish their decisions. In order that the miscreant solicitors are named in order that the miscreant solicitors are not named and shamed. In my case, 13 substantial complaints were upheld by the legal ombudsman, but the journalists who would like to write about this are prevented from doing so, not by an NDA, but by the legal ombudsman itself. The Law Society Gazette, The Guardian, and the Financial Times want to cover this story. They have suggested to me that I ask somebody to read out my decision, which I have with me, in the Houses of Parliament, suitably redacted, which is the only means by which they are actually going to be able to write about it and expose the role of the enablers in selling these such damaging, unaffordable loans. People have been made bankrupt, homeless. It's shocking.
Who's your MP?
Greg Hands, unfortunately, RateSetter, who are the firm behind Novitax, who are funding these loans, their chief executive officer is a chap called William Lewis, OBE, and he's a friend of David Cameron, but he also lived in my borough, Fulham, and they're donors to the Conservatives, so I haven't had any luck with Mr. Hands. He's been good on other things, but he's not responding on this.
Can I just say, sorry to interrupt, Lord Prem Sikka, Greg Hands is also my MP. And he won't do anything about the insolvency frauds or the family court frauds. And just to say, the family lawyers are making between 500 to 600 million per year on defrauding we the people who are instructing them, where quite often they're in collusion with the judges and racketeering. That's how simple this is. And the simple answer to all of this today is, and I'm going to repeat it, who is auditing the auditors on the bigger picture on all of these frauds?
So all I'm asking for is if somebody would be kind enough to read out,
You.
suitably redacted, this decision in the House, and then the journalists can cover the story.
Well, let me just tell you what we do in the Lords.
Okay.
We can ask oral questions which are balloted if your name comes out of the hat. Mine has today. I will have 30 seconds to ask the question. Okay, so I'm just telling you. Then we can apply for what I call questions of short debate, which are 1 hour long. Again, they are balloted, and maximum you might be able to speak is about 10 minutes. Then we have bills which come through, like second reading and so on. So depending on whether something gels with a bill, you can speak. But again, given the number of peers who want to speak and so on, you're lucky to get 10 minutes. Okay? House of Lords has various committees, like the House of Commons does. So one of the bad things is offer to be a witness to one of those committees, depending on what they are investigating. And then you can actually file your document and it will go on public record. You can do the same in the Commons. Okay? In the Commons, your MP can demand what is called an adjournment debate. Okay? Adjournment debate means the MP has a control of the floor and only your topic can be discussed for 30 minutes. Okay? The minister must reply. Okay, that doesn't mean they will, because they must reply. We have no equivalent facility in the Lords. Okay, we have a poor relation. So much so, I get a lot of abuse from the people, but what they don't know is I have zero admin support, I have no researcher help, nothing. I'm all by myself, that's why I can't take on individual cases in detail. People send me masses and masses of boxes to read. Can't do it, okay? I was working, some of you may have got an email from me, working till about 12:30 this morning. I was up at 6, okay? So it's fairly long hours. I'm taking on the bill, one bill I'm very opposed to, the bill which gives government powers to snoop on people's bank accounts. It's 300 pages long. The explanatory notes are 300 pages long as well. I've been looking at that for about the last 6 weeks. So we are basically left to ourselves in the Lords on individual basis. I have an office which I share with 4 other people, and it is impossible to have a private meeting with anybody there. So the thing is, we have a sham democracy which strengthens the executive. I went to Denmark and everybody has 4 to 5 researchers, and they were absolutely amazed that I haven't even got anyone to answer a letter or email for me. Okay, so I'm just telling you, not ducking the issue. I'll do what I can, but if what
somebody could write to Mr. Hands Because he's not responding to me.
Right, well,
And prevail upon him, or Michelle.
I think
Prevail upon him, maybe
I think speak to me or give me a call, send me an email, we'll have a chat, and I'll see if I can recommend some MPs to read out your stuff in one of the committees.
Andrew Bridgen, I'm the MP for North West Leicestershire. If you contact me, we'll see how we can.
When MPs don't have that much staff, so I'm very grateful for Andrew taking this on. So it is really, really helpful. Andrew, do you want to add to anything you heard here so far?
Well, I was involved in the uncovering of the post office scandal, and that was bad enough. You'll notice I've been completely written out of the story, but I mean, Ron Warmington, the investigator of Second Sight, was my man. I put him into, and thank goodness it was Ron Warmington of Second Sight, a small company. He's a man of the highest integrity. And if it had been one of the big four, I have no doubt this would have been covered up by the offer of a further contract in the future. Ron was at the end of his career. He was the CEO of his own company. He was a man of the highest probity and integrity.
Yes.
And I told the Cabinet Office when we started the investigation, they accepted Ron as the investigator in Second Sight, that the Cabinet Office had to fund that investigation. You couldn't let the Post Office fund their own investigation. Otherwise, the moment that the investigators found something untoward at the Post Office, they would seek to put pressure on the investigator, because he who pays the piper undoubtedly calls the tune, as we've seen with all the financial regulators and the investigators of financial fraud are all funded by Lloyds Bank in this case. And of course, that's exactly what happened. The moment that Ron Warmington and his team uncovered what was going on with the Horizon scandal, all the reports were being redacted by the Post Office before they were being released to me and the other MPs who are interested. Ron Warmington leaked the reports unredacted to me, and exactly as I predicted, the Post Office threatened to take him to court for breach of contract. And if he hadn't have stood his ground, and the whistleblower from Fujitsu hadn't then come forward and verified everything that my constituent Michael Rudkin had said, and the part of the case, and this is something that came to me weeks after being elected as a new MP, and I'm quite naive, but I believe these people had nothing to gain from the tremendous story he told me. Mr. Rudkin actually was the representative, my constituent was a representative of all the sub-postmasters in the UK. And he was invited to go to Fujitsu, and if you watch the documentary, you'll see his part is played out. He believes they mistook him for someone else, actually took him downstairs into what they called the boiler room and showed him people live changing the accounts of sub-postmasters, something that they always denied in court could ever happen remotely without any evidence. And more worryingly, and I laid all this out in the House of Commons in Hansard in a debate 9 years ago, that he returned home that night, had been thrown out of the building, to his wife, who was keeping the sub-postmaster. He was the official sub-postmaster, but his wife ran the sub-post office in Ibstock in my constituency. And by coincidence, the very next morning, inspectors arrived and said he'd got a £44,000 shortfall on his computer. That wasn't an accident, that wasn't a glitch in the system. My constituents were deliberately targeted to discredit them because they'd uncovered 9 years, in 2008, exactly what was going on with this fraud. And that is deeply worrying, and no one has ever been held to account for that crime.
I spent 3 hours.
Sorry.
Thank you, Lord Prem Sikka. The Financial Conduct Authority has been mentioned several times, and so too the Post Office scandal. I work with the Transparency Task Force. We've got to know the Financial Conduct Authority very, very well. And you're all invited to the Zoom meeting, 6 p.m, 30th of January. The title is, what are the similarities between the Post Office and the Financial Conduct Authority? Please attend, you might find it rather illuminating. And thank you so much everybody for organising this event, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you to everybody for attending, and actually to Prem Sikka for organising this. Everybody's echoing very, very similar experiences. So the reason why I'm speaking today is that You might have seen, I've been highlighting this stuff for about 10 years. I do videos, I've been in the national press, etc., and Lloyd tried to gag me to try and cover the Bristol frauds up about over 10 years ago. Now, the Bristol frauds are progressing quite a lot, and the purpose for me speaking today is just to give everybody a little bit of hope that I'm making a lot of progress. And Lloyd are very scared, because it's not about fighting a concrete building. The bank exists now, the chairman's come and go, and the bank will continue to exist. The way to crack it is really personal culpability for the executive and also for the directors. And my effort, and I've sat in meeting rooms with Anthony, with the police, looking through our evidence. My aim is to make sure that there is no plausible deniability on behalf of Robin Blumenberg, Alan Dickinson, and every single board member and every single executive. Now, I've had personal meetings with the chief officers of that bank, because my aim is to make sure that when it breaks, nobody in that organisation can say that they didn't know. And nobody will be able to then sideline this into another fake dogs inquiry, which is itself a barrier to justice. So my aim is to just give people some hope that I have got the executive and the directors on the hook for knowing all about the frauds in Bristol. And as soon as it comes public, I wish you all the best. Get your evidence ready, and I hope that we can get some justice after a decade of fighting.
We are reaching the end, so just have last couple of questions. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Thomas Wolford. I'm not a victim. I work for Expert Evidence. We are a firm of expert witnesses that gives evidence at trials, both civil and criminal. And I've been involved in many of the cases that a number of you are talking about. The first point that I'd make is you haven't mentioned the Foskett inquiry, which I know has come up with 212 judgments already concerning the Lloyds TSB. But what I think you are missing is the situation and the position of our courts, both civil and criminal, which is why I support the political judgment that has been made in the Post Office sub-postmasters' problems, in actually coming to a political solution, because our criminal justice system has been unable to deal with it. The same is true of the libel cases, where after something like 8 years, it is at last coming back to the Court of Appeal. But we need to have a court system that actually deals with these as well. And I would encourage you to focus on actually ensuring that they actually have the position and the authority in order to be able to investigate and come to judgments in your favour.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shida Oraki, a victim of the Post Office Counters Limited since 1998. When my MP kindly raised my case in the Parliament and in the Hansard of the Parliament, I could say that everybody was aware about the monopoly of the Post Office Counters Limited. My news was broadcasted by ITV News at 1 o'clock because I got PhD on international politics. I came into this business due to the family commitment to have a control of my children. I did not want to leave my children alone with a carer, etc. Being a sub-post mistress, I have to work only 18 hours, but it's my worst experience in my life. Because of challenging the Post Office Counters monopoly, I have to be targeted. My case went through the Parliament. I changed the Hansard. I did in the Hansard and I changed the law. If Post Office Counters Limited decide to close any offices, pay the goodwill of the sub-postmaster and sub-postmistress. And after that, I was targeted by the legal team of the Post Office Counters Limited. And now it's 27 years I'm in court, twice been made bankrupt wrongly. My case has created a bad law in this country where the people are suffering as a result of the bad law. The insolvency practitioners are taking over case and repossessing the property of the people.
the houses of the people at the back of the wrong judgment. This is not fair when the 7 High Court and Court of Appeal judges are saying, me and my husband are victim of miscarriage of justice. And yet, in 2019, we were evicted from our family home. Fortunately, our legal system is not corrupt completely. We have got good High Court judges, permanent judges. I separate them as a deputy judges who are the practicing solicitors and barristers and are in the pocket of the big. And Lord Prem Sikka, you know about my case, how wrongly I was made bankrupt 2006, and why there is no control over the law society and bar council. All of us, we are suffering. If we would have had a proper advocacy in this country, none of the banks would have behaved like this. None of the organization would have behaved. Yesterday, I was in the court. I go with a bill of the cost for 1,800, 1 hour hearing, 3 months case. My opponent, RPC, from the QIC insurer, because now I'm suing my solicitors, they are coming with £27,660 bill for 1 hour hearing. When I said to the judge, please, can we investigate this? Okay, I lost the case because I'm against the insurer. It's not easy. Litigating person goes against the insurer, IPCQ. The bill from 27,000 was reduced to 10,000. And when you look at this bill, you see that they are miscalculated. The figures are even multiplying by our rate, it doesn't match to each other. And the judge allowed them £10,000 cost. We don't have a proper law society. Law society are not fit for purpose.
Yeah,
Anthony?
I'll reply actually.
Yes.
Jules, yeah. I've been aware of the Dr. Shady Iraqi case for quite a long time. For a very small alleged debt, they have gone for every one of the family assets. They've been manufacturing bills, colossal legal bills, and though she can win in some courts, they will then move it to another and lose and run up the legal bills. Her case is an utter scandal from beginning to end.
At the Royal Court of Justice, when I was waiting to get the document, I said, risk opposition has to have an application, has to have an order. Can I have the copy of this? There was no such a copy, and the court manager saying, Dr. Oraki, move on aside, we don't have anything. I said, put it in writing that there is no such a document in my file. No, we can't do it. If you don't move, I call the security. They call the security. Security, like a bag of potato, manhandling me, taking me out of the court. Again, I come back to the court, they called City London Police, and they broken my hand. Oh my God. 3 times I have been arrested by police, and finally City London Police, unlawfully, just because I resist to get the evidence. I would like accountability from the law society, from the bar council.
Regretfully, I have to close at this point because this room is booked for further events later on, and they would probably want to rearrange the chairs and also have some meetings. But we will be organising further events, hopefully in a bigger room, and you will. I have now your emails, and you will all, in due course, be told, and hopefully you will come. Let's please join hands and thank Anthony.